The Mare didn't just stumble, she collapsed right there, at the old wooden porch, dust rising around her like smoke from a gunshot. Her legs folded. Her breathing turned sharp and shallow. And for a long second, the entire ranch froze. No one moved, except one person. An 80-year-old woman stepped out of the house. Slow, steady, no panic in her eyes. The ranch hands expected her to call the vet. Maybe cry. Maybe whisper goodbye. Instead, she knelt beside the Mare and did something no one on that ranch had ever seen before. Something that made the toughest cowboys remove their hats. What happened next didn't just save a horse. It changed how that entire ranch understood strength, loyalty, and the quiet power of someone everyone had underestimated. And trust me, you won't believe what she did with nothing but her bare hands, and a memory most people had forgotten. If you love real Western stories that hit the heart and stay with you long after they end, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes age never defines courage. Now, let's step onto that dusty ranch. The sun had barely climbed over the eastern ridge when the ranch began to stir. Light spilled across the open pasture in long golden strips. The wind moved slow through the tall grass. Horses shifted in their stalls. A normal morning. Quiet. Predictable. Until the Mare broke from the fence line. She was a strong bay. Wide chest, clean legs, proud neck. The kind of horse people turned to look at twice. Her name was Willow, and she wasn't just another animal on the ranch. She was the bloodline of champions, the future of spring breeding, the kind of Mare that carried both money and memory in her bones. But that morning, something was wrong. Her gait wasn't steady. It was uneven. Short. One of the ranch hands, Caleb, noticed first. He leaned against the corral post, squinting into the light. Is she limping? He muttered. Another hand shrugged. Probably stepped wrong. But Willow didn't slow down. She moved toward the main house, not toward the barn, not toward the trough, toward the porch. And then it happened. Her front legs buckled. Dust burst into the air as her body hit the ground hard enough to echo. The sound carried. Woodpeckers startled from trees, cattle lifting their heads in unison. For a split second, nobody moved. It's strange how shock works. The mind refuses to catch up with the eyes. Then Caleb dropped his coffee mug and ran. Get the vet. Someone shouted from the stable. Another ranch hand circled behind her carefully. Easy, girl. Easy? Willow tried to rise. Her muscles trembled. She let out a low, strained sound that didn't belong on a healthy horse. It wasn't a whinny. It was something deeper, something desperate. And then the screen door creaked open. Every head turned. Eleanor Whitaker stepped onto the porch. 80 years old, silver hair pulled into a low braid, denim skirt brushing her boots. No rush in her stride, no alarm in her face. The ranch had belonged to her family for 3 generations. She'd ridden this land before most of these men were born. But in recent years, she'd stepped back. Let the younger ones handle the heavy lifting. Let the new methods take over. They respected her. Of course they did, but they didn't expect her to intervene. Ma'am, Caleb said quickly, slightly breathless. She just dropped. We're calling Dr. Harris. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She walked down the porch steps slowly, one hand sliding along the rail. Her eyes never left the Mare. You could feel it shift, the air, the mood. She knelt beside Willow without hesitation. Up close, the signs were clearer. The tightness in the flank, the way her nostrils flared, the sweat that didn't match the cool morning temperature. Colic. At least, that's what the younger ranch hands thought. And colic could turn deadly fast. Eleanor placed her palm gently against Willow's neck. Not checking a pulse, just touching. She closed her eyes for half a second. Caleb exchanged a look with the others. Was she praying? Remembering? What was she doing? Ma'am, he pressed gently. The vet's 15 minutes out. Cancel it, Eleanor said softly. The words landed like a dropped hammer. Cancel it? Caleb blinked. Yes, there was no tremble in her voice, no uncertainty. Now the men were uneasy. Respectfully, one of them began. With her breeding value, we shouldn't risk. Eleanor raised her hand slightly, not sharp, not angry, just enough to pause him. Walk her, she said. Ma'am, she can barely walk her. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority older than any of them. Caleb hesitated only a second before nodding. All right. Slow and steady. They coaxed Willow carefully. It took effort. She resisted at first, legs shaking beneath her weight. But Eleanor remained beside her, one hand resting along the Mare's shoulder. Good girl, she murmured. Her voice wasn't sweet. It wasn't baby talk. It was firm, grounded, like she expected to be obeyed. The ranch hands formed a loose circle as they began walking Willow slowly across the yard. One step, then another. The Mare's breathing was still strained, but she moved. Eleanor kept her eyes fixed on the horse's abdomen, watching, measuring. Bring me warm water, she said after a moment, and fetch the small leather bag from the pantry cabinet. Caleb frowned. The old one? Yes. He didn't argue this time. There was something different in her tone now. Not urgency. Not panic. Recognition. As if she'd seen this before. As if this wasn't new. The men did as told. Warm water arrived. The leather bag, worn, cracked at the edges, was placed in her hands. He opened it carefully. Inside were small glass bottles, dried herbs wrapped in cloth, items that looked like they belonged in another century. Caleb swallowed. Ma'am, with all due respect, modern treatment is useful, Eleanor finished calmly. When you understand what you're treating. She mixed something into the warm water, measured by sight, not by scale. Colic isn't just pain, she continued, almost as if teaching a class. It's fear inside the gut, panic in muscle. The ranch hands exchanged looks again. Fear in the gut? But Willow's ears flicked backward toward Eleanor's voice. She was listening. The old woman stepped forward and guided the water gently toward the Mare's mouth. Not forcing, just offering. Willow resisted. Then, slowly, she drank, a small amount. But enough. Eleanor ran her hand along the Mare's side again. Keep walking, she instructed. Minutes passed, then more. The sun rose higher. The air warmed. Willow stumbled once more, and this time Caleb's heart jumped into his throat. But Eleanor didn't flinch. Steady, she whispered. And then something subtle happened. The Mare's breathing changed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. But it softened. The tension in her flank eased just slightly. One of the ranch hands noticed first. She's not clenching as hard. Caleb leaned closer. You're right. Eleanor said nothing. She just kept walking beside Willow. Slow, measured, present. No panic. No rush. As if she understood something the rest of them didn't. And for the first time that morning, the men weren't just watching the Mare. They were watching her. Because whatever this 80-year-old woman was doing, it wasn't luck. And it definitely wasn't outdated. It was knowledge. The kind carved from decades of dust, loss, and long nights in barns no vet ever saw. But the question still hung heavy in the rising heat. Was it enough? Because even as Willow's breathing steadied, a faint tremor still ran through her hind legs, and Eleanor's eyes, though calm, were calculating something. Deeper. Something the ranch had forgotten she ever possessed. By mid-morning, the panic had softened, but the tension hadn't left. Willow was still on her feet. That alone surprised everyone. She moved slowly in the outer paddock now, her head lower than usual, her body tired but upright. The ranch hands took turns watching her, whispering in low tones as if loud words might undo whatever fragile progress had been made. But their eyes kept drifting back to the porch. Eleanor Whitaker sat in her wooden chair, hands folded in her lap, watching the pasture like she always had. To the younger hands, she was part of the ranch the way the windmill was part of it, always there, always turning quietly in the background. Important, yes, but no longer central. They knew stories about her. Everyone did. They knew she'd broken her first horse at 14, that she'd once ridden through a spring storm to bring a foal into the barn before the river flooded, that after her husband passed, she ran the entire ranch alone for nearly a decade. But stories become legends, and legends start to feel distant. Caleb leaned against the fence beside Martin, the ranch foreman. You really think she knew what she was doing? Caleb asked quietly. Martin kept his eyes on Willow. I think she's forgotten more about horses than we've learned. That wasn't the answer Caleb expected. He studied the old woman again. She didn't look powerful. Her shoulders were narrow now, her hands thinner. When she walked, she favored her left knee slightly. Age changes the body. That much was obvious. But what if it didn't change the mind the same way? Eleanor had grown up in a time before easy phone calls to veterinarians, before trucks that could haul an animal across counties in an hour, back when you either understood your animals or you lost them, and she had lost some. That was something the ranch hands didn't talk about much. Years ago, before Caleb ever stepped foot on the property, there had been a stallion named Rustler, strong, fast, wild-eyed. Eleanor loved that horse the way some people love their own kin. One winter night, Rustler had shown signs of colic. There was no vet nearby. Snow blocked the road. Eleanor stayed with him through the night, walking him, talking to him, doing everything she knew. He didn't make it. People assumed that loss would have pushed her toward modern dependence, toward outside help for everything. Instead, it sharpened her. After Rustler, she studied harder. She traveled to neighboring ranches, spoke with old cattlemen, breeders, even a retired army farrier who knew more about muscle strain than most doctors. She listened. She observed. She wrote things down in a leather notebook no one had seen in years. Knowledge built slowly for her, not from textbooks, from mistakes, from grief. And that's the part the younger ranch hands didn't understand. To them, calling a vet was responsible, safe, smart. To Eleanor, it was part of the solution, not the only one. By noon, Willow had stopped trembling. She stood near the water trough, ears flicking at flies, breathing steadier now, not healed, not strong, but present. Caleb walked up to the porch, hat in hand. Ma'am, he said respectfully, she's stabilizing. I know, Eleanor replied softly. He hesitated before speaking again. Why didn't you call Dr. Harris? It wasn't accusatory. It was honest curiosity. Eleanor looked out across the land before answering. Because if you don't understand the first steps yourself, she said, you'll always depend on the last ones. Caleb frowned slightly. She continued. Most colic cases worsen because people panic. They force feed. They leave the horse alone. Or they keep it lying down too long. The gut twists when fear sets in. Fear? Caleb repeated. Yes, horses feel fear in the body before they feel pain. That line stayed with him. He had never thought of it that way. To him, illness was mechanical. Something broken that needed fixing. A system that failed. But Eleanor spoke as if Willow were more than muscle and bone. As if the connection between them mattered. Did you notice? Eleanor asked suddenly. Where she collapsed. Caleb blinked. At your door. And where was she grazing before that? North fence line. That's a quarter-mile away, Eleanor said gently. Caleb nodded slowly. Horses in severe colic don't seek out distance. They don't choose direction. They react. So why had Willow walked all the way to the porch? Why there? The thought unsettled him. Eleanor rose from her chair carefully and stepped down the porch again. She walked toward Willow without hurry. Mare lifted her head when she approached. That small detail didn't go unnoticed. Eleanor placed her palm against Willow's cheek. You came for help, she murmured. Martin, standing nearby, cleared his throat. Ma'am, are you saying she knew? Eleanor looked at him with steady eyes. I'm saying animals. Remember who stands with them when it hurts. Silence fell between them. The ranch had modern fencing, modern trucks, modern medicine. But maybe there was something older that still mattered. By late afternoon, Willow passed manure. A simple, ordinary event that felt like a miracle. Caleb let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Martin removed his hat, briefly. But Eleanor didn't celebrate. They kept watching. Because recovery isn't a moment, it's a process. And something in Willow's eyes still carried exhaustion, deeper than simple stomach pain. As the sun dipped lower, painting the fields orange, Eleanor turned back toward the house. Keep her moving gently for another hour, she instructed. Then let her rest standing. Yes, ma'am, Caleb replied, without hesitation this time. And as she climbed the porch steps again, the ranch hands exchanged looks. They hadn't just witnessed an old remedy. They had witnessed command, quiet, undeniable command, the kind that doesn't need volume. But even as Willow stabilized, a heavier thought began forming in Martin's mind. If this had been simple colic, the herbs and walking might have been enough. But what if it wasn't simple? What if something deeper had caused the collapse? And if that were true, was Eleanor already preparing for it? Because back inside the house, unseen by the others, she pulled out that old leather notebook. And turned to a page she hadn't read in over 20 years. Inside the house, the ranch felt far away. The walls were lined with old photographs, black and white images of horses mid-stride, men in wide hats, a younger Eleanor sitting tall in the saddle. Dust floated in the late afternoon light, quiet and slow, like time itself had softened in this room. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with the leather notebook open in front of her. The pages were worn thin at the edges, ink slightly faded. But the handwriting remained steady, firm strokes, careful spacing. Notes written over decades. Observations, remedies, outcomes. Some pages were marked with a small symbol in the corner, a simple circle. Dustler's page had one dot, and now Eleanor's finger rested on another. Sudden collapse after early frost, she read softly to herself. No prior feed change. Tension in flank. Irregular breathing. Resolved only after muscle release and nerve calming. She closed her eyes briefly. This wasn't ordinary colic. Fully. Outside, Caleb and Martin continued to walk Willow gently. The Mare's steps were steadier now, but her head still dipped low between strides, as if something heavy pressed down on her from the inside. Martin glanced toward the house. She's been inside a while, he muttered. Caleb nodded. You think she's second-guessing? Martin shook his head slowly. No, I think she's remembering. That word carried weight. Eleanor stepped back outside just as the sky began shifting from gold to copper. In her hands, she carried more than herbs this time. She carried a small cloth roll, tied carefully with twine. Caleb noticed immediately. What's that? He asked. Something I hoped I'd never need again, Eleanor replied. They gathered near Willow, who stood quietly now, ears twitching at distant cattle sounds. The Mare's breathing had improved, but her back muscles remained tight, stiff as drawn wire. Eleanor handed the cloth roll to Martin. Open it. Inside were smooth wooden tools, rounded, polished by years of use. Caleb frowned. Massage sticks? Pressure tools, Eleanor corrected gently. For releasing locked muscle along the spine. Martin blinked. You think this is muscular? I think pain travels, Eleanor said. And when it does, it can trap the gut. The younger men exchanged looks. They were used to injections, tubes, modern protocols. This felt different. But hadn't the walking and herbs already worked? Hadn't she been right so far? Eleanor stepped beside Willow's flank and placed her palm along the Mare's spine. She moved slowly, feeling for tension points. When her fingers paused near the lower back, she nodded slightly to herself. There. She took one of the wooden tools and pressed gently, not harshly, not abruptly, just steady pressure. Willow shifted at first, ears flicking backward. Caleb tensed. Careful. Eleanor murmured. She adjusted the angle slightly and applied consistent pressure in a small circular motion. 30 seconds passed. Then, something subtle happened. Willow exhaled, not sharply, not in pain, but deeply. A long, drawn-out breath that carried more relief than sound. Martin's eyebrows lifted. Eleanor moved to another. Point slightly higher. Same motion. Same steady patience. Another release. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden collapse of tension, but the Mare's body began to soften. Caleb stepped closer. Where did you learn that? Eleanor didn't look up. Army farrier. 1968. He treated cavalry horses overseas. Said tension locks faster in cold air. She shifted position again. Modern medicine treats the symptom first, she continued, which it should. But sometimes the cause hides in muscle. Martin watched carefully now. You're saying she wasn't just sick? She was seized up? I'm saying her body panicked before her gut did. The ranch grew quiet as the sun dipped lower. Even the wind seemed to slow. Eleanor worked methodically along the Mare's spine and flank, releasing pressure point by pressure point. It took time. Nearly an hour. No rush. No wasted movement. And with each release, Willow's posture changed. Her neck lifted slightly. Her ears moved forward. Her tail flicked in a more relaxed rhythm. Caleb felt something strange settle in his chest. Respect. Not polite respect. Real respect, because this wasn't guesswork. This was memory guided by experience. When Eleanor finally stepped back, she wiped her hands on a cloth. Let her stand, she said quietly. They did. Willow stood still, balanced, calm. Minutes passed. No trembling. No strained breathing. Then, almost casually, the Mare took 3 confident steps toward the water trough without prompting. Caleb's mouth parted slightly. Martin exhaled slowly. I'll be... Eleanor didn't smile, but her shoulders lowered just a fraction. She need rest, she said. And light feed tonight? No grain. Yes, ma'am, Caleb replied automatically. But as relief began to ripple through the ranch, Eleanor's eyes remained thoughtful, because she knew something the others didn't. This wasn't random. Cold mornings. Sudden tension. Collapse at the porch. Patterns matter. She looked toward the north fence line, where Willow had been grazing earlier. Tomorrow, she said softly, almost to herself. We'll check the ground. Martin heard it. Ground? Eleanor nodded. Sometimes what hurts a horse doesn't start inside the horse. Caleb frowned. You think something out there triggered it? Eleanor's gaze stayed fixed on the pasture. I think, she said slowly, we're not done asking questions. The sun slipped below the ridge. Long shadows stretched across the ranch. Willow stood steady now, stronger than she had all day. But something unseen still lingered. Because if Eleanor was right, if the collapse wasn't just illness, then whatever caused it was still out there. Waiting. Night settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. The sky turned deep blue, then black, scattered with cold, sharp stars. The wind shifted from warm to biting, carrying the kind of chill that seeps into wood and bone alike. Lanterns flickered near the barn. The cattle quieted. Even the coyotes held their distance. But no one truly relaxed. Willow stood inside the open stall closest to the yard. Fresh straw lined the ground. A bucket of water rested within reach. She looked steadier now, almost normal to an untrained eye. Almost. Caleb leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. She looks better. Martin nodded slowly. She does. But? Martin glanced toward the porch. But she hasn't laid down. Inside the house, Eleanor moved with deliberate calm. She brewed coffee she wouldn't drink. lit an oil lamp she didn't need. Then she picked up her coat. At 80, most would have chosen rest. She chose the barn. When she stepped inside, the lantern light painted soft gold across her face. Willow's ears flicked instantly toward her. "There you are," Eleanor murmured. The Mare shifted her weight, not nervously, expectantly. Caleb straightened. "Ma'am, we can take watch tonight." "I know you can," she said gently. "But I won't sleep anyway." That ended the debate. She entered the stall slowly, closing the half-gate behind her. The straw rustled beneath her boots. She placed one hand along Willow's shoulder again, feeling warmth, rhythm, tension. Better, but not fully right. She listened closely to the Mare's breathing. Slow, even, yet occasionally a slight hitch. Eleanor stepped back and lowered herself onto an overturned bucket in the corner of the stall. And she waited. Hours passed that way. The ranch hands rotated shifts outside. Coffee cups refilled. Boots scraped wood. The night deepened. Inside the stall, Eleanor didn't speak much. She just stayed present, watching the subtle language of muscle and ear and breath. And around midnight, Willow shifted sharply. Eleanor's head lifted instantly. The Mare's hind leg trembled, just briefly, before settling again. Small, but important. Eleanor rose slowly and ran her hand along the lower spine once more. The tension had returned slightly, though not as severe as before. She exhaled quietly. "Still holding on to something, aren't you?" she whispered. Outside, Caleb noticed movement and stepped closer. "Everything all right?" "For now," Eleanor replied. Martin joined him. "You still think it's something in the pasture?" Eleanor hesitated. "I think," she said carefully. She reacted before we saw the cause. The men exchanged glances. "You mean like she sensed something?" Caleb asked. "Horses feel the ground through their hooves," Eleanor said. "Vibration travels faster than sight." Martin frowned. "You think there's a sinkhole?" "A wire? Something buried?" "Possibly," she said. "Or something chemical." That word changed the air. "Chemical?" Caleb repeated. Eleanor nodded slightly. "The north fence line borders the old irrigation ditch." Martin's jaw tightened. "The abandoned one?" "Yes. Years ago, that ditch had carried runoff from neighboring farmland. It hadn't been used in decades. But after heavy frost, sometimes old soil shifts. Old things surface." Caleb swallowed. "You think she ingested something?" "I think she stepped where something disturbed her." The idea settled heavy between them. Eleanor stepped out of the stall briefly and looked toward the distant pasture, now barely visible under starlight. "First light," she said firmly. "We check every inch." They agreed without argument, but the night wasn't finished. Around 2 in the morning, Willow finally lowered herself, slowly, cautiously, onto the straw. Caleb tensed. "Should we get her up?" Eleanor watched closely. The Mare didn't thrash, didn't strain. She folded gently and rested her head upright. "That's not distress," Eleanor said quietly. "That's exhaustion." Minutes passed. Willow's breathing remained steady dot, and for the first time all day, Eleanor allowed herself to sit back against the stall wall. Relief hovered close, but didn't land fully. Because deep down, she remembered Rustler. He had improved before midnight, too, then worsened before dawn. Fear is quiet at night. It creeps into memory. Caleb must have sensed her tension. "You saved her today," he said softly. Eleanor shook her head. "No, she fought. I just listened." There was no pride in her tone, only truth. The barn clock ticked faintly. Wind brushed against the tin roof. Around 3:30. Willow shifted again, but this time she pushed herself upright without struggle. Martin let out a breath. "That's strength." Eleanor nodded slightly. "Yes," she said. "It is," but her eyes remained thoughtful. "Because strength returning doesn't erase the question of why it left." Dawn approached slowly. pie-gray light stretching across the horizon. As the first birds stirred, Eleanor stepped outside the barn. Cold air filled her lungs. She looked toward the north fence line again. Something there didn't sit right in her mind. A pattern, a memory, a detail from long ago, tugging at her thoughts. She turned back to the ranch hands. "Get the truck," she said. "Shovels, too." Caleb blinked. "You think we'll find something buried?" Eleanor's gaze was steady. "I think," she replied. "Willow tried to show us something." The sun began to rise, faint and quiet. Behind them, inside the barn, the Mare stood tall, once more stronger alive. But out in that pasture, beneath frost-touched soil, near an abandoned ditch, something waited to be uncovered. And whatever it was, it had nearly taken down the strongest Mare on the ranch. The sun rose pale and cold over the north pasture. Frost clung to the grass in thin silver threads. Every step across the field made a crisp sound under boots. Caleb drove the old ranch truck slowly along the fence line while Martin stood in the back with 2 shovels rattling against the metal sides. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat, eyes fixed ahead. She hadn't slept. But she didn't look tired. She looked certain. "Stop here," she said suddenly. Caleb eased the truck to a halt near the bend in the old irrigation ditch, the one that hadn't carried water in decades. The wood posts along that section leaned slightly, as if the ground beneath them had shifted over time. They stepped out. The pasture looked ordinary, quiet, harmless. But Willow had collapsed after grazing here, and Eleanor trusted that detail more than anything. "Spread out," she instructed. "Watch for disturbed soil. Anything unnatural." The men began scanning the ground carefully. Frost made subtle changes easier to spot. Small dips, broken crust, faint discoloration. Martin was the first to see it. Over here, near the edge of the ditch, the soil looked slightly darker, softer than the rest. Not muddy. Just disturbed. Eleanor crouched slowly and pressed her fingers against the earth. It gave way easier than it should have. She nodded once. Dig. The first shovel cut cleanly through the surface layer. The second strike revealed something beneath. Not rock, not root, a brittle, cracked edge of metal. Caleb knelt down. "What is that?" They cleared more soil carefully, exposing a rusted barrel lid, half collapsed, buried shallow beneath the surface. Martin's jaw tightened. "That wasn't here last season." Eleanor's face hardened. "No," she said quietly. "It wasn't." They uncovered more of it. The barrel had deteriorated badly. Its side split open from years underground. A faint chemical smell drifted upward, old, sour, metallic. Caleb recoiled slightly. "What is it?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved toward the distant farmland beyond the ridge. 40 years ago," she said slowly, "runoff from pesticide storage used to drain into this ditch during heavy rain." Martin looked stunned. "You think this is from that?" "Looks like it," she replied. "And frost shifts ground, brings buried things closer to the surface." Caleb swallowed. "So Willow stepped near it, maybe cracked the soil open, and inhaled it," Eleanor finished softly. "Or absorbed it through skin contact."